Today, I'm going to be taking through my initial 7 tips to start to get more kills on the brand new map, Fortune's Keep. By now, a lot of you have had an opportunity to drop in at least for a little bit, or you've watched somebody play it, so you understand the map at least a little bit. So let's go ahead and talk about how we can get more kills. Now, before we jump into my 7 tips that I have for you, we've got to address something major about this map. This map is totally different than Rebirth. It is a totally different dynamic, meaning we have to change our playstyle and our gameplay strategy if we want to drop those higher kill games and have more success. And I'm going to be giving you some gameplay strategy tips throughout this video. You know, in my opinion, the way I view Fortune's Keep, it's a BR map. It's a small BR map with the resurgence dynamic, with the fact that we are flying back in based on a timer. But overall, in terms of gameplay strategy, pacing, positioning, it's probably more Caldera than it is Rebirth. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. Now, the first tip that I have for you is the hot areas of this map and kind of how I've seen most games play out, which is you have 3 hot areas. You have town, you have keep, and you have winery. A lot of people land those places, but what ends up happening because of the way the map is, a lot of the rotations tend to happen towards grotto, and they tend to happen towards town. So what you end up getting is 3 to 4 different teams fighting, and you're fighting 3 to 4 different teams at one time. So that's where we have to talk about our strategy and how we go about handling those situations. Now, the second thing here is, and this is the first gameplay strategy tip that I have for you, is going to be to slow down. This is where I talk about it being a little bit more of that BR effect of positioning matters. Positioning 100% matters. You know, in Rebirth, I have always talked about being patient on your approach, trying to get that first initial knock and then repositioning from there and keeping your enemies guessing. But in this map, it's even more crucial because there are a lot of open areas, which we're going to talk about. There are a lot of teams around you, so positioning is going to matter. We see a lot of rooftops in this, a lot of places that we can get to and use that to our advantage. Now, am I saying that you should just go somewhere and camp? Absolutely not. You know, that would be something that a lot of people did in Verdansk and even in Caldera. No, we want to be moving around. We want to be strategic about how we do it, though. So when I say slow down, we still want to be in the action. We just don't want to be full sending as much as we would on Rebirth. Especially, you know, when you think about Rebirth when you're in prison, it's just go, 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 right? There's never a moment where you're stopping. A lot of times here, we do want to slow down and try to get an initial knock or get some information that we can act upon. Now, the next tip that I have for you, tip number 1, hot areas. Tip number 2, slow down. Tip number 3 is going to be to keep moving. So that is the exact opposite of what I just told you, but this is where we play a little bit of both to our advantage. With this map, yes, there's a lot of open areas, especially in places like Grotto and Winery where it's a little bit more open. There's also a lot of places that you can finesse. In town there is, in keep there is. There's a lot of places that you can go to finesse enemies, to get away when you're low health, to reposition throughout fights and find a different angle to take. So throughout fights, we do want to be playing a little bit quicker, and you're seeing a lot of repositioning here. I'm anticipating, which is definitely a tip. I didn't specifically put that on my list, but you're going to have to anticipate around a lot of corners just because there's so many different places that people can be. And look, I die right here is what it is. We're going to go ahead and drop back in. We've got our loadout down right here. So tip number 3 is going to be to keep moving and repositioning. The more that you can keep moving, the more you can keep your enemy guessing, and the more you can anticipate people around corners, the better off that you are going to be. And you don't want to be sitting still too long. What ends up happening is you get a little bit of that positioning dynamic, right? You might get somebody in keep who's just waiting for that perfect opportunity to shoot you, for you to slow down for just a half second so that he can absolutely torch you. We want to be able to avoid those situations. Now, real quick, if you are looking to get better at Resurgence game modes, both Fortune's Keep and Rebirth, make sure you are subscribed down below. I am the #1 Resurgence coach. My whole goal is just to help you get better. Drop more kills in games, drop your PR, get more wins. I do videos every single day, so just consider hitting that subscribe button. Now, tip number 4 is, again, we're looking at how this compares to a traditional BR, which is going to be your cover. Cover is crucial here. You always have to keep track of where you have cover. Where can you go if you need to heal up, replate, reload, and of course, factoring that in with repositioning as well. You want to know where you can get out of a situation or how you can get out of a situation so that you can replay and get back into that fight. So a lot of times you are going to have to use rocks to your advantage. You're going to have to use crates. You're going to have to understand where your buildings are and constantly be aware. You're almost rotating a lot of times from piece of cover to piece of cover. You know, we'll be talking about loadouts this week where we'll address should you run Serpentine or Quick Fix. We're of course going to be talking about settings throughout This week, we're going to be talking about graphics settings and controller settings and all these different things that will help you be more successful. But of course, going back to what I was saying, which is always paying attention to that cover. You can see me kind of finessing in this building a little bit. There's a lot of opportunities to finesse in it right here. Great example, right? Always paying attention to cover. Boom, I got my cover there. He doesn't know where I went because I was super quiet. I played a little bit slower there. Now we're back in. Now we're going to go ahead and finesse this last guy. I see him over to the right there. So I go ahead, I pull back. I'm going to go ahead and farm that guy, let him live. And this was my first 20 kill game that I had on Fortune's Keep. The other thing, and this isn't a tip, but we're just kind of going with the flow today, is look, understand that this first week is going to be very sweaty. It is going to be very tough, and don't get frustrated. You know, focus on learning the map. Understand that there's a lot of different places that you can learn. Winery. Learn those finesse spots so that we can reposition. Now, tip number 5, kind of leading into that, is going to be parkour. There's so many parkour spots. I don't even want to say so many. You can't even do a jump spots video because almost every single building is accessible. The accessibility and the verticality of this map is absolutely incredible. You can get almost on top of almost any rooftop. That's where I play a little bit more strategic, right? Let that guy get into my angle, and we'll go ahead and run with that for a second here. Trigger discipline is going to be important. Finding opportunities and being a little bit more patient sometimes so that you don't give away your positioning. Because yes, there is a lot of cover here. There's a lot of, you know, it is a pretty open map, but they did a good job of putting a lot of different cover pieces around. You can kind of see that back and forth of, you know, I'm saying one thing and then I say the other thing, and that's just because of how the map is. We slow down, but we also need to play fast. You want to have trigger discipline because there's places that are out in the open. There's also a lot of cover, and that's kind of the unique part of Fortune's Keep. We're going to go ahead and get that kill right there. But going back, especially in places like Town and Keep, play your rooftops. You know, a lot of these guys that are, you know, dropping these high kill games are playing rooftop to rooftop. They're finessing. They're being smart about how they're getting away. And you can absolutely use rooftops to get away. By the way, that's one other thing we're going to be doing this week is, you know, this map is very tough, so we're going to be taking a look at what are pro players doing that they are dropping high kill games in these good lobbies, right? They aren't necessarily, and I'm going to look for one specifically that is a very good lobby and see how these players are dropping high kill games. What does their pacing look like? What does their repositioning look like? Right here, you see a great example. Boom, there's my cover. We're going to go ahead, challenge this way. I buy just enough time to go ahead and push around. I played up. Obviously, my teammates are back at this point, so we're in a good spot. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned this. I'm going to be doing a loadouts video as well. Best loadouts for Fortune's Keep. Now, tip number 6 that I have for you is going to be your mini-map. This is very much the same as Rebirth, but our mini-map is crucial to our success. Why? Because of that fact that a lot of fights, a lot of times the game tends to funnel towards Grotto and Town. Yes, if there's a circle pole over by Winery, everybody goes that way. But in order to get to Winery, you have to go through Grotto. So a lot of times, right there's cover. I try to challenge. I end up going down. We've got 13 kills. We got 7 other teams. Now we have 6 other teams. We're going to go ahead and drop back in here. You know, a lot of times it does funnel through that area, so we need to be using our mini-map to our advantage. Understanding the levels of people. I think that's a big one, especially in Town, especially in Keep, you know, especially where there's a lot of height, a lot of verticality. We need to understand the levels that people are on, which was, you know, yes, it was important on Rebirth and places like Control and Nova and Prison. Wasn't nearly as important or nearly as complex as it is on this map. Obviously, we get UAV up. That's not a tip on here, but of course, as I always say, UAVs are going to make this game so much easier. We see people on our level here. I was kind of curious how I got loadout again, but we end up having good cash flow, which is another bonus tip for you. That I've got a lot of bonus tips, but my 7 main tips I will be reviewing here in a second. So mini-map, understand the levels of where people are because of that verticality component, and of course understanding how many teams are around you when you're being third-partied. And a lot of times when it comes to that, when you're in these super hot areas, it's about that anticipation. It's not about fighting one team, it's about fighting everybody around you, being strategic, you know, really putting yourself in a good position, keeping track of your cover, repositioning throughout fights, and anticipating around every corner. Like I've always said, those are the bots, by the way. If you haven't played this yet, those protect the helicopter. You can see the helicopter on the mini-map. Those kind of defend the helicopter. They're not actually real. You don't get kills for those. So but they do shoot you. They do a little bit of damage. So just be smart about that. Now, the last thing that I have for you before we go ahead and recap and kind of keep taking a look at the end of this game right here, I think we've got respawn disabled, so we should be wrapping up this game pretty soon here, although I'm going to pick up another 7 kills, including an epic finish. But the last tip that I have for you is going to be loadouts. Now, you know, in terms of this map and how I feel, and we'll get into this a little bit more about in our loadout video, what are the best guns to run, what's the best strategy for guns, good shots there with the NZ, obviously, great gun. It's definitely one we're going to be talking about, as well as we're going to be covering perks. But overall with loadout, you know, it is beyond a massive advantage. You know, yes, there's a lot of crates around, but at the end of the day, you've got to be really smart about keeping your loadout, whether that's keeping your loadout guns, flying back in on your loadout. Boom, we torch that guy with the NZ. 16 kills, 3 other teams still up, and we're on pace for 20 here, and TCAP is, of course, going to help me out with it. But with your loadout, it's crucial to keep that loadout up. Keep a loadout on the map. You can see it over to the left here. We're a little bit lucky because our teammate was AFK, actually. He had that glitch where he was plugged in with his keyboard and mouse, so he didn't have his he couldn't switch to his controller, so he ended up just keeping us alive here. But we're able to fight with loadout guns throughout, and I think the biggest thing with loadout is 2 things. The mobility of SMGs is going to be crucial for this map because of your ability to finesse and get away from enemies and then replay, get back into that fight. Also, the length on your primary, the distance that you can get on your primary. A lot of the floor loot guns aren't able to shoot these further distances like over to winery and get it down, whereas your loadout gun should be able to. So that's why loadout is super important in this map. It is, of course, important in Rebirth, but I think it's crucial in this map to make sure that you have loadout throughout as much of the game as you can. So in terms of 7 tips here, the first one is going to be hot areas. We covered the hot areas of the map: winery, town, and then keep with a lot of the action tending to rotate towards, you know, town and grotto. So just keep that in mind when you're positioning yourself and when you're pushing over that way. Tip number 2 is going to be slow down and play your positioning. You know, slow down just a little bit, keep track of that cover, be a little bit more patient approaching fights, but then once you start to get into the action a little bit, once you start to recognize there's multiple teams around you, that's when we need to tip number 3, keep moving, play fast, repositioning. And both of those, you need to always keep track of your cover. Whether you're in a fight, you need to keep track of your cover. Whether you're approaching a fight, you need to keep track of your cover, because at any point in time, you can be shot in the back and you're going to have to get away to a point where you can replate, reposition, heal up, and then get back into that fight right there. Tip number 5 is going to be parkour. You can parkour pretty much anything on this map, so you use that to your advantage to get that verticality on opponents, to finesse enemies if you have to. You know, use rooftops, use your stairwells, use whatever you need to do to use railings, use whatever you need to do to get that verticality. And then tip number 6 is going to be using our mini map. Boom, we got 2 below right here, so we're going to go ahead and use that to our advantage. I'm going to end up pushing down here because I'm so desperate for the 20. I wanted to drop that first 20 on Fortune's Keep. So we're going to go ahead and drop down in here, finesse this last enemy. We barely finesse him. We're going to go ahead and challenge him here just because I really want the 20. And tip number 7 is keep loadout up as long as you can. By the way, look at how clear it is in the gas. That is kind of a nice benefit that you can still fight, although it's a little bit unfair because you can play in the gas really easily. So we're going to go ahead and push in here. I hope you found today's video helpful. Keep an eye out for Fortune's Keep videos all week long. As I always say, let's get better today, and I will see you tomorrow.